Okay, Bible students, let's go. Ecclesiastes. Today is going to be a introduction into the last part of the book. And so we are going to be in chapter 8 and chapter 9, not tonight, but chapter 10, 11, and 12. I'm going to outline the last part of the book for you so that you can understand where we're going, kind of like a road map. I did have a tendency, I had a thought in my head to push pause on Ecclesiastes and kind of leap into some things that we talked about last week, because last week seemed to be very interesting to a lot of people. I think that we have been trained and taught very wrongly about Christ's forgiveness and our sin. I don't know why we continually think that it's our responsibility to shoulder our sin, but you know that Jesus already took care of that, right? And it's a good place to just live in freedom, which is one of the reasons why I want to teach on the book of Galatians, hopefully coming up, so that we can see that this freedom is a beautiful thing if we would just live in it, right? I don't want to do this. I don't want to shut up. Just be quiet, because I know it's going to happen. I'll spend the whole hour just talking about that. So I guess I will say something. There's nothing worse in all Christianity than there you go. Let there be. And so there's nothing worse in all of Christianity, really truthfully, than legalism, because we were just talking about this earlier. It makes people feel like they're in control when they're not. Right? And so it makes sense that, first of all, there's nothing we can control in the universe. And when we think that we can control our sin, that puts us in a dangerous place. Right? And so what happens is there's this reverse thing that takes place, that we know we can't control our sin, but we can bear it. That's what legalism is. Jesus, and I tried to make that clear last week in Romans and other places, Jesus is like, how about you quit doing that, let me take it. Right? That's what Christianity is. That's the difference between religion and Christianity. Religion is trying to earn your way, and Christianity is just letting God do its thing. That's a big difference, right? So anyway, hopefully we're living in freedom. All right, now I'll be quiet. Ecclesiastes, we're coming to the end of the book. Again, don't know how long it's going to take us, but we're coming to the end. There are 12 chapters. I really do hope that you have been blessed by the things that have been taught and studied and read. I really hope that this has made a difference in your life. When we get into chapter 8 and 9 and 10 and 11, he's going to now bring what I would call bring this thing in for a landing. He's going to bring a conclusion to the book. And he's going to do so in 3 different areas. So I'll just outline it for you real quick, and then we'll pray. In chapter 8 and 9, you're going to want to write over the title of that, Do the Right Thing. If God is in control, and again, we know He is, since God is in control, we need to do the right thing. And He's going to show you in chapters 8 and 9, He's going to show you several different areas of our life that we need to do the right thing. All right? So that's chapter 8 and 9. When you get to chapter 10, because God is in control, we need to be poised. And we'll talk about what poised looks like and how it's defined and so forth. Chapter 10 is be poised. And in chapter 11, because God is in control, we need to live forward. Live forward. which speaks to me because I'm a person who likes to live in the past. So 11 is live forward, right? And then 12 really is the conclusion. So that's the outline of where we're going. And so I'm going to pray for us, and then we will go. We'll ask God's blessing on tonight. Lord, thank you for this evening. And God, I just ask that, in fact, I'm going to just take a minute of silence here, Lord, for you to settle our hearts. As we study, I really pray that you would help us to see the need that we have and the inability of us to understand and comprehend your mind and your desire. Lord, I pray that you would connect us with the Spirit that dwells in us, those of us who are Christians tonight, and that the Spirit of God would illuminate to us your word, and we could understand, and we could comprehend, and we could walk out of here very thankful that we sacrificed this time tonight, we came, that we would be very thankful. Also, Lord, I pray for your presence. In a way, Lord, that we could all experience it tangibly. That we would know without a doubt that you are here in the teaching of your word, in the presence of your people. As we look at your word, I pray that you would give us insight and understanding to how you feel about these topics that we're going to cover now based on the fact that you're in control. And so I pray that God, you would, as you did with Daniel, as you did with Ezekiel and Isaiah, as you did with Jesus and the disciples, did with Paul, I pray that you would show us yourself tonight, and that we would be able to rest and find comfort in the fact that you are in control. And I ask that you would do that for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. So if you were to go to coffee tomorrow with a friend and they asked you about your Wednesday night Bible study, I would hope that at some point in your explanation you would bring up Ecclesiastes chapter 3, particularly verse number 14. I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it, so that people fear before him. That which is already has been, that which is to be already has been, and God seeks what has been driven away. I don't know if you chose at the beginning of all of our studies, I don't know if you chose to pick colors to highlight with, but my Bible's purple. You know, I highlight all my God-centered verses in purple, and it's just purple. This book is purple. It's about God. It's about God being in control. Tonight's going to be one of those times that we're going to kind of collide a little bit with our own thoughts, and I'm just going to ask for you to really, really lock in, because this first section is difficult. He starts out in chapter 8 under the title, Do the Right Thing. And he says, who is like the wise, and who knows the interpretation of a thing? What's another word for interpretation? Does anybody know? Anybody want to take a guess? If I interpret something, I'm doing something to understand. What's that? Meaning, yeah. Another good word is discern, right? If I'm going to understand something, I'm discerning, right? So in light of the fact that God is in control, I should have a different discernment in certain areas. And so he says, who is like the wise, and who knows the interpretation of a thing, or the discernment of a thing? A man's wisdom makes his face shine, and the hardness of his face is changed. So wisdom, I don't know if you stumbled across this one yet, but wisdom is really a good thing, right? Do you remember the illustration of the difference between wisdom and knowledge? Do you remember that? Knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. Right? Somebody told me that a couple months ago, and I thought, that's brilliant. I got to use that. Right? Was that you, Mel? Did you get that? So, but it's good, right? Right. And so what he's going to say here is you need to be discerning. You need to be wise in the course of life when you see things that just don't make sense. Here's the first one. He says in verse 2, and I want you to make sure your eyeballs are on it, right? I say, keep the king's command because of God's oath to him. Now, sorry, but what do you probably suppose we're going to talk about tonight? Politics. Yep, that one thing that we're not supposed to talk about, right? Look at what this says. I say, keep the king's command because of God's oath to him. Now, if you're reading the ESV, there's different versions. It doesn't even say because of your oath or because of God's oath to him, but because of your oath to God. So there's a different translation there, right? So either way, there's an oath that has been made, and the ESV folks want you to know that God has ordained the leadership. You see that? And so what I want to look at a little bit is this idea of the leadership of God. Now, I already know, because I know you well enough, we're family now, I already know that it's a struggle in us. I get that. I understand that. I understand that the word but comes up in our head every time we see something that collides with our own thinking. Is the Bible telling us to submit to the king, even if the king is bad? Well, let's talk about this, because the answer to that, sorry, is yes. That's exactly what the Bible's telling us. And I'm going to show you tonight that there are times when you don't have a choice in the matter. Now, for the most part, we are surrounded by soldiers in this room, and I for one, am horribly thankful for our people who have allowed us to be free in America. Don't ever misunderstand that part of me. I'm very thankful. When you take, and notice I didn't continue that sentence with but, when you take Scripture, there are things you have to filter through in balance of our beliefs. And you got to be ready that it might collide with what you believe. For instance, this verse here, I say, keep the king's command because of God's oath to him. The person who originally read this, did that person have a vote? No, he didn't. Did he have a say? Nope. Did he have anything to do with anything? Nope. So we have to read it through his eyes. It says, keep the king command because of God's oath to him. And we'll come back to that in just a second. It says, be not hasty to go from his presence, and do not take your stand in an evil cause. Well, that makes sense. For he, the king, does whatever he pleases. For the word of the king is supreme. And who may say to him, what are you doing? Whoever keeps a command will know no evil thing. And this is the part where we really need to focus. Whoever keeps a command will know no evil thing. And the wise heart will know the proper time and the just way. If you're going to underline something, that's what we want to underline. That's how we live in a government that we don't agree with. We don't, as Christians, walk around. If we believe God is in control, we don't walk around and, we just don't fly flags with a cuss word on them in our yard. I'm hoping you know which one I'm referring to. We just don't do that. As Christians, we don't fly those kind of flags. If you're going to fly a flag, at least make it worth something, like God is in control, or praise Jesus, he's alive, or something. If you're going to fly a flag, at least run one up the pole like that, right? What does this say in verse 5? Whoever keeps a command will know no evil thing, and the wise heart will know the proper time and the just way. In the world, to live wise means you try to live at peace with one another. You try to live in unity with one another. One of the worst things that we have is politics, because what it does is it polarizes. Right? It polarizes. If you don't wear the right color tie, then truthfully, I have the right to kill you. That's what's in people's heart. Does that make sense? If you're a Democrat and I'm a Republican, then I have the right to kill you. That's literally the attitude. Tell me if I'm lying. Jesus said, if you've ever hated a person in your heart, you murdered them already. Tell me if I'm lying. And yet, y'all were here a few years ago or whatever it was when our friend hollered out at the back about the Democrats, and I lost my mind because it's like, wait a minute, aren't they Americans? I mean, whether you hate them or not, that's another issue, but they're still under the same flag. And so knock it off, especially if we are Christians. Because there are verses that say, you shall know them by their, what's that word? Yeah, but there's another one. They shall know you by your what? Your love. Oh, your love, except for ... right? What this guy is telling us, and this is what I want to make sure you see, this is a way to live with people you don't agree with in politics in love. Whoever keeps a command, that's you, will know no evil thing. Oh, can I pick on a command that just came down the pike not too long ago that everybody didn't like? Oh. Pick me, please.
Okay, go.
Thank you. Whoever wears a mask without complaining knows no evil thing, and the wise heart will know the proper time and the right way to handle something. But no, let's all just complain, right? Which, by the way, I'm going to say this now because hardly anybody's wearing any masks anymore. I'm going to say this. Had your child acted the way you acted when you were forced to wear a mask, you would have whooped him. If they would have thrown the fit you threw, would have been backlash. Now, what the point of this text is this. We have a responsibility. If God is in control and we actually believe that, we have a responsibility to live a certain way. Verse number 6. For there is a time and a way for everything. Although man's trouble lies heavy on him. Now, here's what I want to say about this. if you were to be teaching this, and it says, I say, keep the king's command, what would you say the context of these verses are? What's the subject matter? Obedience, good. To who?
To the ruler.
Whoever's in charge, right? All right. Doesn't say necessarily whether he's good or bad. It just says, yeah, be obedient to authority, right? Great lesson. Great lesson. Here's why. Look at verse number 7. What are you laughing because you read verse number 7?
It's a king that's actually writing this.
Isn't it funny? It's so hilarious that a king, the wisest king, is writing this. Yeah.
Obey your king.
Yeah. Verse number 7. All right. For he does not know what is to be. For who can tell him how it will be? So he's talking about the man here who is supposed to be, whoever keeps a command will know no evil thing, and the wise heart will know the proper time and the just way. For there is a time and a way for everything. Although man's trouble, man, not the king, man's trouble lies heavy on him. For he, man, does not know what is to be, for who can tell him how it will be? You can't predict the future. I can't predict the future. We do not know. Now, just so you know, and I just am in awe that you all come back on Wednesday at all because of the conflict in the book of Ecclesiastes. But I just want you to know that that's the theme for the next 3 chapters. You don't know. Right? Chapter 8, verse 7, for he does not know. Look over at the very last verse in chapter 8. However much man may toil in seeking, he won't find it out. Even though a wise man claims to know, he cannot find it out. That's another topic that we're going to get to later. Look down at verse number 1. But all this I laid to heart, examining it all, chapter 9, verse 1. But all this I laid to heart, examining it all, how the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God. That's interesting. Whether it is love or hate, man does not know. Look over at chapter 9, verse 12. For man does not know his time. And so I really, truly think that what Solomon is trying to tell us is wisdom really at its base level is you coming to a place where you admit you don't know what you don't know. Right? And I think there's rest in that. I think part of the problem that gets us into trouble is we actually think we know more than we do. Right? And instead of admitting, hey, you know what? I don't know. Let me show you some verses that kind of back this whole thing up as far as maybe we don't know everything that we might think we know. Would you turn to Daniel chapter 4? How many of y'all have done a study in Daniel? Anybody ever studied Daniel? Okay. Let me show you some really cool things in Daniel. If you're studying Daniel, the key verse for all of Daniel is chapter 4, verse number 17. Is that right? 4:17. There you go. Well done. 4:17. And I think this really, really solidifies this whole idea of, we just don't know. And particularly in this paragraph, we don't know what's going on. We don't know the big picture. Though we might think we do, we don't. We have to be really careful about thinking that we do. Excuse me while I gather myself. Chapter 4, verse 17. The sentence is by the decree of the watchers, the decision by the word of the holy ones, to the end that the living may know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will and sets over it the lowliest of men. Let me read that again. The sentence is by the decree of the watchers, the decision by the word of the holy ones, to the end that the living may know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men, and the Most High gives it to whom he will, and sets over it the lowliest of men. Who's in control of government? Except for now, right? That verse hasn't changed since it was written. God is in control. And we don't know what's going on. If you turn one chapter to the right, chapter 5. And there's a lot of reading here. So get your pens out and get ready. King Belshazzar made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in front of the 1,000. Belshazzar, when he tasted the wine, commanded that the vessels of gold and of silver that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem, that he be brought, that the king and his lords, his wives, his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought in the golden vessels that had been taken out of the temple of the house of God in Jerusalem. And the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. When I was teaching through Daniel the very first time, that was a massive thing. Belshazzar's dad takes all of the sacred, holy items out of the church, and now they're drinking, toasting to their gods of gold and bronze and other things. Verse number 5. Immediately, the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote. On the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, opposite the lampstand, and the king saw the hand as it wrote. Then the king's color changed, and his thoughts alarmed him. His limbs gave way, and his knees knocked together. The king called loudly to bring to the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers. The king declared to the wise men of Babylon, "Whoever reads this writing and shows me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom." Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or make known to the king the interpretation. Then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed, and his color changed, and his lords were perplexed. The queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet hall, and the queen declared, "O king, live forever. Let not your thoughts alarm you or your color change. There is a man." If you want to underline something, that's quite a verse. At this time, by the way, Daniel is 80 years old. There's a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. In the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father, your father the king, made him, Daniel, chief over the magicians, enchanters, Chaldeans, and the astrologers, because an excellent spirit, knowledge, and understanding to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now, let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king answered and said to Daniel, "You are," what does your Bible say? You're that Daniel? You're the one that I just was told about? One of the exiles of Judah, whom the king my father brought from Judah? I have heard of you that the Spirit of God's is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now the wise men, the enchanters, have been brought in before me to read this writing and make known to me its interpretation, but they could not show the interpretation of the matter. But I have heard that you can give interpretations and solve problems. Now, if, that's a big if, you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain around your neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, "Let your gifts be for yourself. Give your rewards to another. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. O king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father kingship and greatness and glory and majesty. And because of the greatness that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would, he killed. Whom he would, he kept alive. Whom he would, he raised up. Whom he would, he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up, and his spirit was hardened so that he dealt proudly, he was brought down from his kingly throne, and his glory was taken away from him." Do y'all know the story of Nebuchadnezzar? Do y'all know the story that King Nebuchadnezzar was given all the authority by God, and then he went nuts, and he was an animal out in the wilderness? Y'all know that story, right? If you don't, please read that one. He was driven from among the children of mankind, and his mind was made like that of a beast. His dwelling was with the wild donkeys. He was fed grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, until he knew that the Most High God rules the kingdom of mankind and sets over it who he will. I wish Daniel would have said that earlier somewhere. Like, say, chapter 4, verse 17. So, just push pause for a second. King Nebuchadnezzar is the example that Daniel's going to use to King Belteshazzar before he gives the interpretation of the dream. What would you say is the greatest lesson that King Nebuchadnezzar ever learned? That God's in control. Verse 22, and you, really it should be not and, but you, his son, Belshazzar, you haven't humbled your heart, though you knew all this. But you have lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven. I'll just stop. We've been reading the whole story. How did he lift his heart up to heaven? Give me examples. Here's one. How about go get all of the gold and silver drinking vessels that were once in Jerusalem and bring them here, and we are going to toast our gods with those.
But you'd say that's how he lifted himself, because you said, how did he lift up heaven?
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry. How did he lift himself up? Yeah, good call. My fault. I was wrong on that. I was wrong. Sorry. Yeah. How did he lift himself up, right? He did that, right? So would you say that maybe, I don't know, if God's consistent, something might be coming down the river for Belshazzar? Yeah. Remember what I just said. something might be coming down the river for Belshazzar. But you lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven, and the vessels of his house have been brought in before you. And you and your lords, your wives and your concubines have drunk wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see or hear or know, but the God in whose hand is your breath. Might want to highlight that one. But the God in whose hand is your breath, and whose are all your ways, you have not honored. 23 verses in. Do you probably suppose Belshazzar is becoming a theologian or not? Or is he getting more hardened? What would you say? Then from his presence the hand was sent, and this writing was inscribed. And this is the writing that was inscribed. Mene, mene, tekel, and parsin. Here's what it means. Mene, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you've been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. I don't know if you caught that in that little paragraph right there, but Belshazzar just stopped at that moment being the king, though he's sitting on the throne. Right? Isn't that crazy? He's done. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and Daniel was clothed with purple. A chain of gold was put around his neck, and a proclamation was made about him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. That very night. Would you underline that? That very night, Belshazzar the Chaldean king was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Would you do me a favor in verse number 30 and 31? Would you count how many words are there? How many words are in 30 and 31? What? 24. About 24, whatever. 25 words, I don't know, right? 24, 25? In 20-some words, he summed up one of the greatest feats in the history of the military. Babylon had a river running right through the middle of it. It ran right through the middle of the palace. Darius the Mede, while the handwriting was on the wall, while Mene, Mene, Tarkin, Parsons was being written on the wall, at the moment while it was being written, Darius the Mede had dammed up the river. Y'all know this? Crawling underneath the palace, not being heard because of the party with his army. And then immediately sprung up and killed him. Awesome. I think I could say with confidence, Belshazzar didn't know. Right? He had no clue. And if Belshazzar didn't know, well, I don't know, maybe going all the way back to Ecclesiastes, we might not either. Doesn't that make sense? So the best way to live in a world where God is in control is do so, back in Ecclesiastes, with wisdom. Sure.
The queen here,
Mm-hmm.
is that Belshazzar's
No. Well, see, that's a great, it's a great question. It's actually the queen mother, Nebuchadnezzar's wife. Yeah. And crazy. Right. One of the many. Yeah. It really is it is the queen mother. But yeah. So back in Ecclesiastes. And folks, we could do this all night long. Like I can show you time and time again in the scriptures that over and over and over again, people are confronted with horribly bad governments. And who are the people that suffer under horribly bad governments? Usually first, God's people. And time again, they're told, live wise, live well, live. And the reason why is in verse 7, for he doesn't know what is to be. For who can tell him how it will be? And then to show how weak we are, look at verse number 8. No man has power to retain the Spirit or power over the day of death. There's no discharge from war, nor will wickedness deliver those who are given to it. All this I observed while applying my heart to all that's done under the sun, when man had power over man to his hurt. Now, let's just break down verse number 8 and go slow. No man has power to retain the Spirit or power over the day of death. Would you agree with that much? How many of y'all know exactly when you're going to die? Right? Let me ask you this question. Have you ever been in a place before in your whole entire life where it was so dark that you wish you were dead? Has anybody ever been there before? And for some reason, God kept you alive, and you would have traded him anything to die at that moment? When you read verses like this, no man has power to retain the Spirit or power over the day of death. Man, that brings into a whole different perspective about how weak we really are. Isn't that crazy? There's no discharge from war. You know what that means? You can't discharge yourself. You don't even have enough control if you're in an army to discharge yourself. Nor will wickedness deliver those who are given to it. What does that mean? Just like the soldier can't get himself out of the battle because he's right smack dab in the middle of the battle, so you can't get yourself out of the wickedness that is gripping your heart. I'm reading that right, correct? I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? So how incredibly weak are we? All this I observed while applying my heart to all that is done under the sun, when man had power over man to his hurt. So he's watching men hurt men, right? Is that the way I read that? And he's like, well, wait a minute. What's the hope? So what would you say? You're with your friend tomorrow at coffee, and he's like, that is one of the most dark, hard texts. What's the hope? Well, what would you say to him?
God is in control.
Chapter 3.
Everything's for God's glory.
Chapter 3. God is in control, and he's doing stuff that we don't know for his own glory, right? For all we know, somebody has dammed up the river, and they're crawling underneath the palace even as we speak. And it could be a lot worse than we thought, right? So going back to the whole chapter 8, verse 1, We need to do the right thing. If God is in control, we need to do the right thing. And if we don't know what in the world we're doing, what is the right thing in this text? You tell me. Yeah.
Military allegiance in our country is not to the president, it's to the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
There's an oath to the Constitution
Absolutely.
against all enemies, domestic and foreign.
Yep.
So if he is against the Constitution, you have a right and an obligation to take that person.
Yeah, and you know what? And you should, right? And you should, right? But this isn't a political debate. This is about who's in office right now and our attitude toward that.
But it's obedience.
And so it's obedience.
Obedience
And
to the Constitution.
and the problem is this. The problem is what we do, and it's a great thing to talk about, is we don't do what we're supposed to do. We just sit and complain about it. And that's what I have a problem with. If you're going to do something, shut up and do something. But at least shut up, because you don't know what's going on. Go do your duty and get it done. But no, what we're going to do is we're going to buy a flag down here at the corner of 181 and 775 that says a cuss word on it with the president's name. Are you kidding? Because that's the exact opposite of what Scripture just told you to do. And on top of all that, Romans chapter 9, whether you like the guy or not, God put him there. And in Ecclesiastes, they didn't have the option of taking their king out. There's all kinds of different layers to this. But here is the problem. I give a rip about the layers. What I give a rip about is our own heart and how we are responding as people who have been saved by the grace of God. I have written down here, I'm not making this up. The key to having any success in this whole mess that we call this world is you have to think 150 years from now. You have to think 150 years from now. You have to think 150 years from now. You have to have your mind set on 150 years from now. If it doesn't matter 150 years from now, it probably doesn't matter. There's some things that do, right? But you have to think 150 years from now. And I think what the writer of Ecclesiastes is telling us is we have to be people who actually are living out our faith. Does that make sense? Go with me to the book of Hebrews chapter 11. Of course, Hebrews chapter 10, which we don't care about because it doesn't really affect us. 10:32, but recall the former days when after you were enlightened, this is a group of people that we have no connection with whatsoever. That's sarcasm if you recognize it. But recall the former days when after you were enlightened, you endured a hard struggle with sufferings, sometimes being publicly exposed to reproach and affliction, sometimes being partners with those so treated. For you had compassion on those in prison. You joyfully accepted the plundering of your property, since you knew that you yourselves had a better possession and an abiding one. Therefore, do not throw away your confidence, which has a great reward. You accepted the plundering of your property? Oh, you didn't have a flag that said, come and take it. Oh, I see. Because they were living by faith in chapter 11, verse 6, that says, without faith it's impossible to please him. Chapter 11, verse 13, these people who lived by faith all died not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For people who speak thus make it clear. They seek a homeland. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But, as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore, God's not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. They were thinking ahead to a country that's a heavenly one. I wonder if we do that. Or do we just complain?
It's easy to complain.
It is, especially when we don't know what we're talking about. Lord, thanks for the position we're in. Thanks that we don't have tanks rolling down the road right now, nor bombs going off. Thanks that we don't have to bury some of our family because somebody pulled them out of their house and shot them in the head last night. Lord, I pray that you change our hearts. I pray that you would help us realize that we are living under a king. And you're not the king of a country. You're not the king of the globe. You're king of the whole thing, the universe. And it's to you that we owe our allegiance. Change our hearts.